Hi everyone, Becky here and welcome back to my channel, or if you are new, welcome, and if you are new, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you're notified of future videos. But today we are sewing up the Sevilla dress from Little Lizard King, and this dress is so cute. It has really cute scallop detail, trim at the bottom, and it's a lot more simple to do than you would think. But if you need some help, I am here. I'm going to go through the entire dress and go through all the steps. Now this dress has the option to be a relatively simple dress with just a bodice and a basic skirt, or there's all of these bells and whistles of ties up at the shoulders, put a little bow at the shoulder. There's a sash around the waist, you can tie a big bow in the back, and then the scallop trim on the bottom. And I'm going to be sewing up all of those options on the dress, so if you aren't doing those, you can simply just skip over, or if you need help with just one part, you can go down to the description and select the part, and it'll take you right to that part in the tutorial that you are looking for. This dress is drafted for woven fabric, which means it does not have stretch. So like a cotton is something that is going to be good, rayon, challis, something along those lines, that basically just as long as it doesn't stretch. And I will be using a cotton woven from, I believe it was from Hobby Lobby, the lemon fabric, and then the gingham border that I'm using is from Joann's. And if there's anything in the video that I mention, tools or things like that, I will put a link for those down in the description. So let's get started. Get started, we're just going to go over the pieces, and like I mentioned, I am doing the scalloped hem on the skirt. I'm doing the ties around the back and the ties on the strap. So for every piece, you're going to have a main and lining front bodice. You're going to have two sets of opposites for your back bodice, and one set is going to be your main, one set's going to be your lining. I'm using the same fabric for my main and lining because I had enough, and it just matches a lot better when you can use the same fabric. But it's not a requirement. You can use whatever fabric you want for your lining. You just want to make sure it's like the same weight and thickness and stiffness, just so that it lays nicely. Otherwise you could have your garment laying wonky if your lining and your main fabric aren't similar types of fabric. But then you're going to have your skirt pieces. If you're doing the scalloped hem, you're going to have a scalloped edge. It's going to be a little bit shorter. You want to cut that scalloped out on it. You're going to have two pieces of that. If you're doing the basic skirt, it's just going to have a longer rectangle than the shorter one with the scalloped edge. And then also with the scalloped edge, you're going to have two scalloped trim pieces, which I have here. You're going to have a placket piece for your back. And then if you're doing the shoulder ties, you're going to have two tie pieces and two tie pieces if you're doing the waist tie. So that's everything that you need. And like I said, this is all with all of the bells and whistles. So if you're not doing the shoulder ties or the bow tie, you just don't need those. And if you're not doing the scalloped hem, you don't need this. So basically anything of the yellow plaid is all optional. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set everything aside besides our ties. So I'm going to bring this over here. And one thing, when you are cutting this out, you're going to want to press your fabric, wash your fabric, and dry it to get the shrinkage out of it, because with cotton especially, it's going to shrink a decent amount, and especially in these smaller sizes, it's going to shrink enough that most likely if you don't pre-wash it and then you make it and then you wash it, it might not fit. And you know, you might say, well, I don't put my stuff in the dryer. Well, somebody in your household might, and there's a good chance that it's going to make your garment not fit. So pre-wash your fabrics, pre-dry them, shrink them down as much as you can before you cut. Then you want to press it, and I like to starch it. It makes it real nice and stiff and lay flat. This is what I use, this Mary Ellis's Best Press. Great. It's a little bit different than like regular starch you get at the store. You can see here, one, it's clear, so you don't have that buildup. It's made to help relax wrinkles, and it also is a little bit of a stain guard in it, which is great. And so if you want some of this, I will put a link in the description. But anyways, I'm going to bring my iron board over here to show you how we're going to do the ties. So I'm just going to show you one, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay it down with the wrong side up. And we are going to fold it in half with the wrong sides together. And press this down here. And then I'm going to unfold it. And then at the end over here, I'm going to fold this up 3/8 of an inch and press it down. And I'm going to do that on both sides. And then I'm going to fold it in half again here and just repress this corner there. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Press that down. And then now I'm going to fold this in kind of like you're making a double fold bias tape. And you're going to fold that raw edge into your center fold and press this down on one side. And then flip it around, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Fold this side down with the raw edge to the center fold again, making sure we keep this side that is already pressed down nice and flat so it doesn't get balled up under the iron. And then we're just going to refold it on that center fold again and press that center fold, matching up those folded edges like that. And then once it's all pressed, you're just going to take this over to your sewing machine and you're just going to sew a straight stitch at about 1/8 of an inch from this double folded edge all the way down to close it. And when you do it, you want to make sure just that these edges are laying nicely, that fold at the end, so that they're not sticking out. So you'll just sew that up, and then you'll repeat those same steps for your other piece. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this one and then do all of my steps for this piece and be right back. All right, I got my shoulder ties sewn up. These are basically like a strap, if you ever sew straps, but these are done, and I just had to trim my thread. So these we're just going to set aside till the end, and now we're going to take out our sash piece, and I'm going to leave my iron out because we are going to press this. And what we're going to do is we're just going to, with right sides together, fold it in half, lining up our angled side and this top edge here. And then we're going to press this fold here in the center to get it ready to sew. And once that is pressed, we are going to go over to our machine, and we're going to sew along this top edge here, pivot at this angle, and then all the way down and finish at this fold. So you're going to do that on both of your waist tie pieces. So here's my whole piece, you can see. And so we can leave this end open, but we're going to sew, and I'm going to sew that up and be back. All right, so once you have this sewn, you're going to want to take your scissors and trim the corners there, and I like to kind of trim my seam here through that corner as well. And then we are going to flip it right side out. I'm just gonna flip it out. This is a long one. Pull it out, and then you're going to want to pop out your points. And I like to use this. It's called That Purple Thing. They are really cheap. There's so many uses for it. But this point, it's plastic. This point is great for pushing out corners. Point, so I'm just going to come in here and push my point out. Make this one lay nicely. And then I'm just going to lay it back out here. Press this down. Make your seam nice and flat. Make sure it's not flipping over anything. I'm going to press this fold as well. And then we're going to take this over to our machine and top stitch. I like to top stitch the entire piece over the fold and the seam. It just makes it lay nicer, and it's not going to flip or fold or anything at this seam. So I'm going to take this over. You're going to just stitch all the way around at about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And then we're going to just do that on the other tie piece as well. All right, so I have both of my sash pieces sewn and top stitched, and they're ready to go. Now we just need to do one more step to finish them off, and that is putting a pleat in the piece. So the first thing we're going to do is you're just going to fold the end in half. We're just doing it on the open end with that raw edge, and we're going to fold it in half like this. We're just going to press a crease in there, and then we're going to fold it in half again, and we're going to press it again. You want to give this a real nice heavy press so that it stays, because you are pressing over, what is it, 8 layers of fabric right there. And so see, like mine went in there kind of okay, but what I'm gonna do actually is I'm just gonna open it and fold it in like this and just press that seam a little bit, just so that it stays a little bit nicer. All right, so I did that. I pressed those lines because we're just using these as guides. Now what we're gonna do is we're going to leave it, we're gonna open it back up, and you're gonna fold it in half again on that first seam, and then where these second lines are that we folded it in half here, we're gonna unfold it. We're gonna stitch along that line with a straight stitch, and we're gonna measure in 2 inches and mark on that line where that 2-inch mark is, and we are going to sew, and I'll do it with my marker, along this line here through both sides of your sash. So I will go sew that and be right back. All right, so now that you have this sewn, I'm going to trim my threads. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to open your seam up so that it's laying flat. So we're going to basically flip out the wings like this, and then you're going to push down on the top of it. So you can see here how it kind of forms a tunnel. We're going to push it and flatten it so that it makes a pleat here. You can see it looks like that, and you want to make sure that you have 2 layers going on both sides. Mine, you can see, isn't, so I'm just going to open that. Then you're going to push it down, so you want the fold where you pressed it to be on top of your stitching line, and then put a pin in it, and then we're just going to baste across here, and that's going to make a nice pleat so that your sash is going to lay nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this up, and then I'll do it on this one as well. All right, so I have those basted on. You can see, so here's the front. There's what the back side looks like, just for reference, and from the top, just basically make a little sandwich. So now we're going to set those aside, and now we're going to work on our bodice. So we're going to get out our bodice pieces, our front and back, and our front and back main, and our front and back lining. So like I said, I'm doing the same fabric for my lining and my main, so it doesn't really matter which one I do, but basically we're going to do the same thing on our main piece and our lining piece. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to, the right sides together, line up our shoulder seams of our front and back pieces. So if you have different a different lining fabric, you want to obviously match up the right sides of your lining pieces so that each piece has the right coordinating fabric. And you want to make sure you have it on the right way. You don't want it this way because you want your arm size matched up. So we're just going to match up all 4 of our shoulder seams, and then we're going to pin them, and then we're going to take these over to our machine and sew across all 4 shoulder seams. So I'm going to go ahead and sew all of those up and be right back. All right, so I have both of those sewn up, and now we're going to take your main fabric, so whichever one is your main, or if you're using the same as mine, then you just pick whichever one you want, and we're going to open it up, and we are going to take our sashes. You're going to put your sash down with that folded pleat side facing your main right side of your fabric, and it's going to be a 1/2 inch from your bottom of your bodice. So you want to line that up, and we're just going to pin it in place, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, and then we are going to baste these on. So let me just get this one on. And then we're just gonna go and baste those on. So I'm gonna baste those and be right back. All right, so now I have those basted on, and we're just gonna kind of pull them down here now out of the way. And we're going to open up our main bodice now. Press your shoulder seams open, and on the main I press them towards the back, and then on the lining I'm pressing them towards the front just to reduce bulk. And now what we're going to do is we're going to lay our lining piece on top of our main. We're going to match up our shoulder seams first. I'm going to just pin those, and then I'm going to work my way around the neckline, matching up the raw edges of my front neckline. There, and then I'm going to go onto my back and pin around there, and then we're going to also go down this side seam right here. We're going to just go down to the corner, and we're going to do that on this side as well. Match up the neckline and down the back, and then we're going to just sew up, pivot, go all the way around your neckline, pivot, and back down. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that up and be right back. All right, so I have this sewn, and now we're going to trim these seams, and I'm going to use my pinking shears. These are just, you can see they're angled scissors, and they cut it in a zigzag, and that helps with fraying. You don't have to use them, but if you have them, I would recommend using them. It just helps the fraying, like I said, and this is going to be inside your garment, so nobody will see it, but you don't want it to fray too much on the inside. So we're going to trim our seam allowance down to about half of what it was, so it'll be about 1/4 inch. You want to make sure you don't cut into your seam, otherwise you're going to have a hole and you're going to have issues. Cut there, and then I'm going to switch to my regular scissors, and here at the corners I'm going to cut the diagonal, again not clipping my seam, my stitching, but you want to get as close as you can to your seam, and then we're going to come to the corner and clip in there and around the curve, but then you just want to go, I like to do about every inch or so. I'm going to just snip into my seam allowance as close to my stitches as possible without cutting them, and that's just going to help this curve lay nice and flat once we turn it right side out. Right, and then the straight sides you don't have to worry about those. And then now we are just going to line up our arm side, and we're going to pin our fingers like I just did, and we're going to pin the arm side all the way around, and then we're just going to stitch around this curve, and then we'll do the same thing on this arm side here as well. So once you have your arm size sewn, you're going to do just like we did with the neckline and trim and clip those curves. And again, clip all the way around as close as you can to your seam without cutting your stitching. And just real quick, a quick tip for when you are clipping your seams here. You want to just line up the tip of your scissor with where you're going to cut. You don't want to come in here like this and try to clip it deep in your scissors, because that leaves a lot of room for air and you're most likely are going to end up cutting through your seams. So you just want to do the tip of your scissors and just cut like that. And it's the same thing when you're cutting out patterns and everything. You want to line up the end of your cut with the tip of your scissors so you don't end up going over too far. But now that you have your seams clipped and trimmed, we are going to turn this right side out. And these channels are pretty small, so it is a little tricky to do. You just gotta be patient and work with it. I think it's the easiest to, you're gonna pull the back through the front no matter what, but I like to kind of push my shoulder seam through here, and then just kind of work it. If you have tweezers or something like that, that would be helpful here. I don't know where mine are, but I'm just gonna pull it through, because if you push this part through first, it just is a little bit bulkier coming through there. So you just gotta keep working it and be gentle so you don't rip any seams, pop any seams. Use whatever you can find to try to help it through. I'm gonna try this, my bodkin, stick it in there and just kind of use them like tweezers and pull out a little bit at a time. All right, I got it turned, and this honestly might be the hardest part of the entire dress, but one thing that I did on my second one that I didn't do or on the other side that I didn't do on my first side was up here in the shoulder seam. I trimmed out my seam allowance at the shoulders, and that helped reduce the bulk, pulling it through there. So I would recommend cutting out your seam allowance up at that shoulder. If you could do it before you sewed your lining on, that would probably be ideal, but I didn't, so I just kind of cut out a little rectangle of those seam allowances up at the shoulder to reduce some of the bulk. But now that we have this all flipped, and I went ahead and pressed it already, but make sure you pop out your corners and get them really nice and have your seams. And then you're just going to top stitch all the way around, starting down here at this back corner, around your neckline, and then back down. So I'm going to go ahead and top stitch that and be right back. Alright, I have this all top stitched and done. And now we are, if you're doing your shoulder ties, we're going to take your shoulder ties, and all we're going to do is you want to find the center point of your shoulder tie, and I'm just going to mark it with a marker because it doesn't really matter, you're not going to see it, and this will just wash out anyways. I'm going to mark that, and then you're going to come over to your lining side, and then just at your shoulder seam you're going to put your tie on there, and you're just going to zigzag over it a couple times in that shoulder seam, so that then when you flip it over it'll be here and you can tie it, and you'll do that with the other tie on both shoulders. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my ties and be back. Alright, so I have my ties sewn on. You can see my zigzag there, and then you just take them and tie your little bow there. And then your bodice is basically done, besides adding your buttons and things like that. And then the last step to finish our bodice is we're going to sew our side seams. So we're going to lay our front bodice out. You're going to put your sash ties in the middle, and you're going to flip your lining out backwards so that the right sides of your lining and your main are both facing up. And then you're going to take one piece of your back and open it up like this, and then you're going to match up this seam here in your arm side, and then you're going to match the side seams like this, and then down here where you have your sash, just want to make sure your sash stays straight. So I'm going to pin it there, and then one in my sash, and then we'll come over to this side and do the same thing. So if you use the same fabric for your main and lining, just make sure this is laying flat here and it's not twisted or anything. But if you use different fabrics, your right sides should be the same fabrics touching each other, so your lining fabric should be right sides together with your lining fabric, and your main fabric should be right sides together with your main fabric. So if you had like your lining fabric touching your main fabric, then you have something twisted or messed up. So just make sure you have everything laid together right and get it pinned, and then we'll just go and sew up both of those side seams, and then that'll pretty much finish up our bodice. So then you can flip this out, and you are basically done. You can top stitch your arm side if you would like, undo your bows up here and top stitch around there, and then if you are doing buttonholes, you can add your buttonholes to your back. Now I'm going to do snaps, and so I'm just going to wait until I'm done with everything to add my snaps at the very end. So now I'm going to just set my bodice aside, and I'm going to pull out my skirt pieces, just the main pieces here. And I am going to skip down in the tutorial quite a bit. I'm going to add my skirt placket now instead of after the skirt is constructed. It's a lot easier when you just have less fabric to deal with. So I'm going to add my placket now. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to line up, take one skirt piece, and we're going to line it up and find the center back. And I'm just going to mark here. And then we are going to measure 2.5 inches down. I'm going to just mark this 2.5 inch mark there, and then I have my top. Now I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to take a straight edge and draw a line from my center top to that 2.5 inch mark. And then now what you're going to do is you're going to measure 1/4 inch from your line in all directions. So I'm just going to do it at the top and bottom on both sides, and then down here at my bottom, and then I will just connect my lines. So I have my marks, and now I'm just going to connect my lines, and we're going to be making a rectangle around our line that we made, and this is getting our placket ready. And so there is my rectangle right there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line from the bottom of this line to the corner of our rectangle to make a V at the bottom on both sides, your corner to there. And we are going to cut, and I'm going to cut my triangle out right to the corner. Be very careful not to go past, and again, like I talked about earlier, cutting, only line up the tip of your scissors to your point. Don't try to cut like this, otherwise you're going to end up cutting through your point. And so now you can see it's opened up like this there. And so now what we are going to do, we're going to take our placket piece and we are going to put it behind our skirt so that the right side of the placket is going to be on the wrong side of our skirt. And we are just going to let it hang over a little bit at the edge. We're going to line up the raw edges here. You want the tip of your little triangle to touch the edge of your placket. And line that up, and then you're going to go over to your machine and you're going to sew at 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is along that line there. And here you want to be very careful. You want to make sure that your stitching is right at the edge of your cuts. You don't want to sew into your cuts, otherwise you're going to have a little hole. So you want to sew along there, and you also want to make sure when you do it that your fabric isn't pooling or getting bunched up there either. All right, so here is my placket sewn on. You can see my stitch line going right through there and on the back. And if you're worried about it, like I always say, baste first if you are worried about it. And then now what you're going to do is you're going to fold your placket up at that seam line, pressing the seam allowance up towards your placket. And then once that's pressed, you're going to fold this down 3/4 of an inch with wrong sides together and press that. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all pressed, and then I will be right back. So once you have that pressed, you're going to fold this down another 3/4 of an inch, like so, over it, basically lining up your folded edges, and pin that in place. Down your placket, and then you're just going to top stitch. You're going to edge stitch this placket at 1/8 of an inch from this folded edge here on the placket all the way down. So I'm going to give this a press and stitch that down. So then once you sew that, then you're just going to lay it down, and you're just going to flip the top side behind and this down right here, and then you can baste this back side up here at the top, baste that down. And so then now we're going to move on to constructing our skirt. So we're going to take your back piece and we're going to lay the front piece on top of it, right sides together, and just match up the edges at the side. And if you are gonna finish the raw edges, I like to typically do it before I sew it, so that I can press my seam open and I can sew them and I can finish them individually. So before I sew this, I will go and I will serge. If you don't have a serger, you could do a zigzag stitch or something, but you're going to need to finish your raw edge. But I will serge the raw edges of my skirt pieces, just the side. The rest of it is going to be enclosed in the seam, so you don't have to finish them. But then you'll just sew down the edges to make a full circle. And if you are doing the scalloped edge, we're going to do the same thing. So we're just going to finish these edges, and then you want to line up the scallop sides. You don't have to line up the scallops, but just make sure they're on their same, facing the same direction, and then line up your edges here on the side and sew that up to make a full loop. So I'm going to finish my edges and sew those up and be back. Once you have both of your skirt and your scallop piece sewn, seams finished and pressed, you are going to, with right sides together, you're going to line up your seams, pin them together at the seams on both sides, and you're basically going to be lining up your scalloped edge then. So I'm just going to do this, and then I am just going to put a pin at the point of each scallop to keep it lined up and in place, but they should fit, should be identical when you lay them down. So I'm just going to keep them pinned right there. You can pin them at the top of the curve as well if you would like. And then you're gonna just keep pinning this all the way around, and then once that's pinned, you're just gonna go and you're going to sew along each scallop And this is using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance when you sew this up. And you want to make sure that as you're sewing, you sew the curve, you get to here, and then you pivot, you leave your needle down through your fabric, lift up your presser foot, pivot your fabric, put your presser foot down. So same thing here. And a really great thing to do is at every point, just measure up, take a marker of some sort and measure up a 1/4 of an inch, and just put a little dot right straight up so that you know that that is where you need to pivot your fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this up, and you'll do that all the way around, and I'm going to do that and be right back. All right, so I have my scallop sewn on here, and I ran out of bobbin thread, so I switched because I'm going to need pink anyways. So you can see that. On this side you can see the pink a little bit better. So now what we're going to do is we are going to trim this seam allowance, and it shouldn't be too big. Now, since you only sewed with a 1/4 of an inch, you're just going to trim it to about half. Again, I'm using my pinking shears. So I'm going to go ahead and finish trimming this real quick, and then I'll be back here. You guys don't need to sit and watch me cut all of this. So I'm going to just trim it and be right back. All right, so once you have it trimmed, then you want to switch to your straight scissors, and at the very least you are going to just go and you're going to snip each point straight up. I like to, I know we trimmed it pretty small, but I still like to go and put in about 3 or 4 little snips along my curve on each scallop. It just is gonna make it lay a little bit nicer. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that and do it all the way around. And then even at the seam here, you want to make sure you snip that as well, and that's just going to really give your points of your scallops a nice crisp point going in and make this curved edge lay really nicely. And so now, once you have all those clipped, what you're going to do is you're going to flip this right side out. And I like to go just in each scallop with my hand and kind of push it out to just kind of start getting that curved shape in there. And it's not going to look perfect at first, but then you're just going to fold it up so that you have wrong sides together. And you can see here, like some of them aren't even popped out, but these just, they look okay, but they're not nice crisp scallops. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my iron, and I'm going to press each scallop and taking extra care at the seams to make sure that they're nice and flat and laying even, and press them all the way around to get a nice crisp edge on each scallop. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and be back. All right, so now I have my nice scallop edge pressed here. You can see, and this is the inside. And now what we're going to do is, I'm actually going to turn it inside out to do this. We are going to take this edge and we're going to fold it down at the pretty much the points of your scallops. So here's where they're sewn. I'm going to fold it down there, and then I'm going to press it, and then on the front it's going to look like this. So you just want to make sure you fold it down even and really about as far as you can from the top of the scallops, and that's how you're going to get this nice border here at the bottom. So I'm going to press this all, and then once it's pressed, it is going to all look like this here, and then you're just going to go over to your machine and you are going to top stitch on the top portion of your skirt about 1/8 of an inch along each scalloped edge all the way around your skirt, and then that's what's going to secure these down. So I'm going to go ahead and press this and top stitch it and be back. All right, so now I have this sewn on, and here's a look far away. Looks super cute. And now typically what I would do, and as in the instruction, is you would hem it. I'm going to wait till the end. I actually wish I would have hemmed this before I sewed it on. When I hem, I like to, if I'm not worried about like the length or being even or anything, like I wouldn't be on this one, I like to hem with as little bulk as possible. So kind of like how I did this early on, so I didn't have this connected to the skirt to pull it down or drag it or have to worry about working around. So really I wish I would have hemmed this under before I attach the scallops, but now I'm going to wait until the very end because of the fact that I am going to be changing out my thread, and I don't want to have to change it again to go back to my pink thread because I've been going between pink and white. And so I'm just going to wait until everything's done, and then I'll switch over to my white thread and hem this. So I'll show you that here in a minute. But now what we are going to do, we are almost done, guys. We are going to gather our skirt, and you can gather this however you want. I'm actually going to do this on my serger. It's just the quickest option right now, and I'm under a bit of a time crunch. You could sew 2 rows of basting stitches and pull it. You could do it with elastic. You could do 3 rows of basting stitches. That really gives you the best results. I do have a video on how to gather using 3 rows of elastic. You could do it with just 2 using that tutorial, and I also have a tutorial on how to do it with clear elastic. If you wanted to check that out, I'll link those down below. But I'm going to do this on my serger, and then I will be right back. So go ahead and put your gathering stitches in however you want, and then we will be back together. All right, so I have my gathering stitches in with my serger, and when you do it with your serger, typically you still have to gather it. So you can see it gathered it a little bit, and if you're wondering, all you have to do is turn your differential all the way up, increase your stitch length to the longest stitch possible, and it'll slightly gather it. And then when you need to gather it more, which you most likely will, you'll just pull out your straight stitches, and those are going to be what you use to pull your gathering. So I just use those and I pull on my straight threads, and that is all. But what we're going to do first is I'm going to take my skirt and I'm going to find my center front, and I'm just going to put a pin in it, and then I'm going to find the center front of my bodice as well, and put a pin in that. And then what I like to do is I typically like to just gather my skirt a little bit first to get it to about the size that I need, and then start attaching it to my bodice to get everything in the right spot and all my gathers nice and even. So I'm just going to gather my skirt from both sides just a little bit. All right, so now I have it gathered just a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, with right sides together of your main fabric, not your lining fabric, I'm going to line up my center front here and pin those together. Then I'm going to find my side seams, keeping those matched up of my bodice, and then the side seams of my skirt. And I prefer to use pins for gathering because you can gather around your pin a lot easier than you can with clips. And it also is it's also more secure, so like when you do with clips, there's a good chance that it's going to pull and it's going to shift and your clip won't end up in the same spot that you started. So I'm going to match up my side seams, and then you're going to match the edge of your back bodice to the edge of your placket over here, and you want those lined up as best as you can. It's a good spot to put some wash away hem tape or a little bit dab of glue, just to make sure that when you sew those together they stay nice and lined up right on that corner. And then here we're going to match it with the edge of our placket where we folded it over. And now you can see my gathering. Like here I need to gather it a little bit more. Right here is pretty good, just not even, so I'm going to even out these gathers through here. And get my gathers laying nice and even. So I'm going to work on getting this evened out, and then I'll be back. Alright, I have my skirt all gathered and lined up, and you can see I have pins about every 2 inches just to really make sure it's evened out and staying in place as I stitch. And I will say, one of the biggest things I see with people is they say, how do you get your gathers to look nicely? And I will die on the hill that 99% of the time it's because you were lazy or didn't take your time. And I'm not saying that to sound cruel, but like this was probably over 5 minutes off camera of me just working on getting it even, shifting things around, seeing how it looks. So you really just need to take your time. And so if you're having issues, then you sew 3 rows of gathering stitches. This is one of the quicker methods, and it's probably one of the harder ones to get to lay nicely, but I've done it enough and I'm comfortable with it. So like I said, you just really need to take your time, put in the effort to do multiple rows of gathering stitches, put in the time to match up your marks, pin everything, and then baste it on. So go in and baste your skirt on, check it, see if everything looks good, and then once you're happy with it, put in your permanent stitch. If you're not happy with it, take your basting stitches out and fix where it needs. And if it's only at one chunk that all the gather shifted or something, just take out that little section of basting, fix it, and rebaste that section, and keep doing that until you're happy with it. It's very tedious, but definitely pays off the more time you spend with your gathers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew this on, and then once I sew it, I am going to serge around it, around the top, to finish this raw edge here. So you can do that. If you don't have a serger, your other option is you could do a zigzag stitch over the edge, or you could do this as an enclosed bodice where I'm not going to show you that or anything, but where you would just sew on your main piece and then you would fold over your lining and top stitch it down or hand stitch it so that your seam was enclosed within the bodice. So that is another way to finish the bodice if you didn't have a serger or you just wanted that seam hidden. But so I'm going to go sew this on with a straight stitch, basting it, check it, then permanent stitch, and then serge it to finish the raw edges. Alright, I have my skirt sewn on, serge this edge. If you're not familiar with finishing the edge, you want to do your stitch and then your serging is just a finish. It's not to secure your stitches. So there's about 1/4 of an inch. I trimmed off just a little bit of my raw edge as I sewed it on. But other than that, that's all that you needed. And then on the front, so if you did basting stitches, you're going to want to remove those if you can see them. If not, then you don't need to worry about it. Another thing I forgot to mention is when you sew it on, your skirt should basically hit right at the bottom of your sash if you have it on there. So you just want to be careful that you don't catch it in your seam as you're stitching, because you don't want this sewn in there. So just make sure you move that out of the way. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to you want to press your seam allowance up towards your bodice, and then you're going to come over to the front after you press it and top stitch along this edge here, and again just kind of going around your sash right there, and top stitch all the way around so that that seam allowance is pressed upwards. So I'm going to top stitch that, and then I'm also then going to hem, and for the hem, that's going to be our last step. You're just going to fold it up 1/4 of an inch, press it all the way around, and then fold it up another 1/4 of an inch, press it all the way around, and then you're just going to edge stitch that top fold there. All right, once you get your buttons or snaps, whatever it is, on your dress, it is done, and this is so cute. This is probably the favorite thing I've ever made for my daughter. And so you have the little ties up here, and you could tack those down so that they stay tied if you were worried about them coming untied or being annoying. The giant bow in the back, and then like I said at the beginning, and like I said, this adorable scalloped detail on the hemline, and it is so cute mixed together. It is great for mixing prints like these, and this one is kind of a little bit more subtle with the gingham, and you could always even add little trim along here. I've seen some people add trim along the scallop, which is really cute. You would just sew those in as you do it, but their options are endless. Like I said, you could also do this without the ties or the sash or the hem and just have a really cute basic dress. Like I said, I will put a link for this down below, and if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop a question down below in the comments and I will try to get back to you, or you can always find me on Instagram. It's at Sewbexx, that's SEWBEXX. I'll put a link to that down below as well, and you can always reach out to me there, and you can follow me and just see what I'm working on. You can stay up to date on videos that I'm coming out with, chat with me, send me a message, send me suggestions for future videos, or just to follow along my sewing journey. So thanks for watching. Bye.